For more than 1,000 years, the Silk Road was not a road at all. It was a living system, a vast, fragile web of caravan routes stretching from the ports of the Mediterranean to the heart of China, binding continents together long before the idea of globalization had a name. Through deserts, mountains, and empires, silk, spices, silver, ideas, religions, and diseases flowed in a slow but relentless current. This network did not merely move goods, it moved civilizations. Cities rose because the Silk Road passed through them, kingdoms taxed it. Empires fought wars to control its choke points. Entire societies oriented their economies around its rhythms: seasonal caravans, market towns, customs houses, and border fortresses. From Samarkand to Baghdad, from Kashgar to Constantinople, prosperity was measured by how close you were to the road, and for centuries, it worked. The Silk Road created wealth without conquest. It rewarded cooperation more than domination. No single empire ever fully controlled it, yet many grew rich by protecting fragments of it. It was the rare system where distance was not a weakness, but a source of power. But this delicate balance depended on one assumption, that the road would always remain open. What historians often forget is that the Silk Road was never inevitable. It survived only because political stability, security, and demand aligned across thousands of miles. When any one of those elements broke, the entire system trembled, and eventually, it did more than tremble. It collapsed, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a long, grinding, unraveling one caravan route at a time. As the Silk Road faded, cities emptied, treasuries dried up, and empires that had once seemed eternal found themselves suddenly irrelevant. This is not the story of a road disappearing. It is the story of how losing a trade route destroyed civilizations that had built their entire existence around it, and how the world that emerged afterward was fundamentally different from the one that came before. At its height, the Silk Road did not belong to one empire. It belonged to many simultaneously. This was its strength. Unlike later global trade systems dominated by a single naval power, the Silk Road functioned as a chain of interdependent civilizations. Each empire controlled a segment, extracted value from it, and depended on the stability of its neighbors to keep the flow alive. China sat at the eastern anchor. Under the Han and later the Tang dynasties, silk was not merely a luxury good, it was state policy. Silk paid soldiers, bribed nomads, and stabilized borders. Chinese rulers understood something crucial. Trade could pacify regions that armies could not permanently subdue. In Central Asia, merchant cities flourished. Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv, and Kashgar were not military capitals, they were logistical ones. Their power came from warehouses, caravanserais, translators, and bankers. These cities became wealthy precisely because they did not produce much themselves. They existed to move, store, and insure the products of others. To the west, Persia and later the Islamic caliphates transformed the Silk Road into a financial system. Muslim merchants standardized contracts, credit instruments, and commercial law. A trader could cross thousands of miles carrying little more than paper promises, confident they would be honored from Damascus to Delhi. The Abbasid Caliphate, in particular, thrived because it sat at the crossroads of everything. Baghdad became the intellectual and economic hub of the Old World, not because it conquered trade routes, but because it regulated them efficiently. Even Europe, often portrayed as a distant periphery, benefited enormously. Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa did not reach China themselves. They waited at the western edge of the system, collecting goods that had passed through dozens of hands before reaching their ports. Their fortunes were built not on production, but on access. What united all these societies was dependence. Tax revenues, urban employment, military funding, and political legitimacy increasingly relied on uninterrupted long-distance trade. Over time, this created a dangerous illusion that the Silk Road was permanent, but it wasn't. The system worked only as long as security, trust, and demand remained intact across continents. Once that trust fractured even in one region, the effects rippled outward. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, the foundations of this golden age began to crack. The Silk Road did not collapse overnight, it fractured. For centuries, its survival depended on one fragile condition: continuous political stability across vast territories, not permanent peace but predictable order. When that order broke down, trade did not adapt, it retreated. The first cracks appeared when large empires began to splinter. As the Han Dynasty weakened in China, frontier security deteriorated. Garrisons went unpaid. Roads fell into disrepair. Banditry increased. Merchants adjusted at first, hiring guards, rerouting caravans, but every adaptation raised costs and lowered profits. In Central Asia, the problem multiplied. Steppe politics were volatile by nature, but when nomadic confederations collapsed into rival factions, the Silk Road's middle segments became dangerous bottlenecks. A caravan could travel safely for months, only to be destroyed in a single, unprotected stretch. Then came war, systemic, recurring, and increasingly destructive. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire removed a major consumer market from the western end of the route. Demand for luxury goods fell sharply. Without wealthy buyers, long-distance trade lost its incentive. This wasn't just a European problem. Reduced demand echoed backward through Persia, Central Asia, and China. Meanwhile, in the East, successive dynastic transitions in China disrupted state-sponsored trade mechanisms. Court politics replaced long-term commercial planning. Military campaigns drained treasuries that once funded infrastructure. But the most destabilizing force came from fragmentation, not invasion. Where a single authority once guaranteed safe passage, dozens of local rulers now demanded tolls, bribes, and allegiance. Every border became a negotiation. Every checkpoint a potential extortion point. What had once been a predictable cost became a series of unknown risks. Trade thrives on certainty. The Silk Road was losing it. Merchants responded rationally. They reduced volume. They favored shorter routes. They shifted toward regional trade where trust was easier to enforce. The great transcontinental caravans grew fewer and farther between. This decline was subtle. Cities did not collapse immediately. Markets still operated, but revenue thinned. Urban populations shrank. States accustomed to customs taxes found themselves underfunded. Crucially, rulers misread the warning signs. They interpreted declining trade as a temporary disruption, something to be taxed harder, controlled more tightly, or militarized. Instead of restoring trust, they accelerated its breakdown. By the time leaders realized the system itself was failing, merchants had already begun searching for alternatives. The Silk Road had not yet died, but it had lost its resilience. And soon, a far greater shock would arrive, one that no empire, no city, and no caravan could outrun. At first glance, the Mongol invasions should have finished the Silk Road forever. Cities were burned, populations were massacred. Ancient centers of learning and commerce were reduced to ash. From China to Eastern Europe, the violence was unlike anything Eurasia had ever witnessed. And yet, paradoxically, the Mongols did something no empire before them had achieved. They reunited the Silk Road. By the mid-13th century, a single political authority stretched from the Pacific coast of China to the plains of Hungary. For the first time in history, merchants could travel thousands of miles without crossing hostile borders. Banditry was crushed with brutal efficiency. Laws were standardized. Punishments for attacking caravans were swift and absolute. This period became known as Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. Trade surged back to life. Silk, spices, precious metals, paper, gunpowder, technologies, ideas, and people moved with unprecedented speed. Marco Polo was not an anomaly. He was a symptom of a reopened world. Diplomatic missions, scholars, and traders followed the same protected arteries that had once been collapsing. But this revival contained the seeds of its own destruction. The Mongol system depended entirely on centralized coercion. It worked not because it built institutions of trust, but because fear enforced order. Roads were safe as long as the empire was strong. The moment that strength weakened, the entire system unraveled at once. And weaken it did. The Mongol Empire fractured into rival Khanate each, suspicious of the others, each desperate for revenue. What had been a unified trade zone became a patchwork of competing authorities. Tolls reappeared, security declined, local conflicts multiplied. More devastating, however, was something far more lethal than politics. The Silk Road became a biological highway. In the 1340s, caravans carried not just goods, but disease. The Black Death followed the same routes silk and silver once did. Cities that depended on trade were hit first and hardest. Entire merchant populations vanished in months. Labor systems collapsed. demand evaporated. Trade networks thrive on human density. The plague destroyed it. Caravan cities never fully recovered. Some were abandoned entirely, others survived as shadows of their former selves. The Mongol states, already politically fragile, now faced economic implosion. As trade dried up, imperial authority followed. The Mongols had briefly restored the Silk Road by force, but by accelerating movement across continents of people, goods, and pathogens, they also revealed the system's ultimate vulnerability. A network that depended on uninterrupted human mobility was catastrophically exposed to global collapse. By the late 14th century, the Silk Road still existed, but it was no longer dominant. And beyond the horizon, something new was emerging. A route that bypassed deserts, borders, tolls, and plagues altogether. A route that would make the ancient roads irrelevant. The Silk Road did not fall because it failed. It fell because something better replaced it. By the late 14th and early 15th centuries, a quiet revolution was underway, one that would permanently redraw the map of global trade. It did not happen in the deserts of Central Asia or the caravan cities of Persia. It happened on the open sea. For centuries, overland trade had been the only viable way to move luxury goods across Eurasia. Ships were dangerous, slow, and limited to coastal routes. Oceans were barriers, not highways. That changed when maritime technology matured. Advances in ship design, navigation, and cartography allowed sailors to travel farther, faster, and more reliably than caravans ever could. The compass, the sternpost rudder, lateen sails, and improved hull construction turned the sea into a controllable environment. And crucially, the sea had no toll booths. A single ship could carry the equivalent of hundreds of caravans worth of goods at a fraction of the cost. It required fewer intermediaries, fewer guards, and fewer political negotiations. Where caravans took months or years, ships took weeks. The economics were overwhelming. European powers understood this immediately. Portugal, Spain, and later the Dutch and British invested aggressively in naval trade, not out of curiosity but desperation. They wanted Asian goods without paying the layered taxes imposed by Silk Road middlemen. When Portuguese ships rounded Africa and reached the Indian Ocean, the old system was doomed. Spices that once crossed deserts on camelback now arrived directly by sea. Silk bypassed Central Asia entirely. Ports replaced caravan cities, harbors replaced oases, and the consequences were devastating for inland civilizations. Cities that had thrived for over 1,000 years lost their purpose almost overnight. Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar were not conquered, they were abandoned. Their strategic value evaporated. Without trade revenue, states collapsed inward. Infrastructure decayed. Populations migrated. Maritime empires, meanwhile, grew rich beyond precedent. Control of sea lanes became the new measure of power. Naval dominance replaced territorial continuity. Wealth shifted westward to the Atlantic, not the heart of Eurasia. The Silk Road had one fatal weakness, the sea did not. It depended on continuous land-based stability across dozens of regimes. Sea routes required control of ports and fleets far fewer points of failure. Once global trade moved offshore, there was no going back. The Silk Road lingered in fragment regional exchanges, local markets, but its role as the backbone of world commerce was over. Civilizations that failed to adapt declined. Those that mastered the oceans reshaped the world. And the collapse of the Silk Road did not just destroy cities, it ended an entire way of organizing civilization itself. The Silk Road did not vanish quietly. Its collapse reshaped civilizations in ways that lasted centuries, and its lessons remained deeply uncomfortable. For societies built around overland trade, the consequences were irreversible. Inland empires that had once thrived as intermediaries lost their economic purpose. Political authority weakened as tax revenues dried up. Armies went unpaid. Infrastructure crumbled. In many regions, the collapse of trade preceded the collapse of states themselves. This was not moral failure, it was structural dependency. Civilizations had optimized themselves for a system that no longer existed. In contrast, coastal societies adapted. Power flowed toward regions with access to navigable seas. Wealth accumulated where ships docked, not where caravans rested. The center of gravity of the global economy shifted first to the Mediterranean, then the Atlantic, and eventually across the oceans entirely. But the deeper lesson of the Silk Road's collapse is not about geography. It is about systems. The Silk Road failed because it relied on three fragile assumptions: that political stability could be maintained across continents, that long-distance land trade would remain economically competitive, that human mobility would remain uninterrupted. When any one of those assumptions broke, the system weakened. When all three failed, it collapsed. Modern economies are no different. Today's global supply chains depend on stability, efficiency, and trust, just as the Silk Road did. They span thousands of miles, pass through multiple jurisdictions, and rely on constant movement. When disruptions occur, wars, pandemics, financial crises, the vulnerabilities are instantly exposed. The collapse of the Silk Road reminds us that globalization is not permanent. It is a phase. It thrives under specific conditions and disappears when those conditions no longer exist. The cities that vanished along the Silk Road were not foolish. They were successful until success locked them into a system that stopped evolving. Perhaps the most haunting legacy of the Silk Road is not what was lost, but what replaced it. The maritime world that followed was more efficient, more scalable, and more ruthless. It enabled empires of unprecedented reach. It also concentrated power in fewer hands, widened inequalities, and made collapse more catastrophic when it came. The Silk Road represented a multipolar world, messy, fragmented, but interconnected. Its end marked the beginning of a more centralized, extractive global order. When we look at abandoned caravan cities today, buried under sand and time, we are not seeing failure. We are seeing a warning. Civilizations do not fall because they are weak. They fall because the systems they depend on change faster than they can adapt. And when trade routes die, civilizations often follow.